"You're a burden. Pack up and leave." That was the last thing my mother ever said to me in person. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even bother closing the door as I walked out. I just grabbed my keys, my laptop bag, and left behind 26 years of my life as if it were a cheap motel room I forgot to check out of. At the time, it didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel life-changing. It just felt like the logical final step in a cycle that had been eating me alive for years. It wasn't until a month later, when my phone lit up with a message from my older sister Danielle, that the weight of what I'd walked away from finally pressed down on me. "Why didn't you cover the mortgage this month?" she snapped. No greeting, no context, no concern. Just the entitlement that had been woven into her voice for as long as I could remember. I answered with one line, "Oh, I thought you didn't need me." That was all it took for everything to explode. But to understand why, I need to go back to the beginning. I'm Barbara Urban, 26 years old. Until recently, I lived with my mother, Teresa, and my sister Danielle in a house that I, not they, owned. Yes, owned. I bought it when I was 24 as a rental property, but plans change. I grew up in a small town outside Minneapolis. Not the wholesome, everybody knows your name type of town. More like the type where neighbors gossip about which trailer has the best meth lab and church ladies spread rumors like seasonal allergies. The kind of place where privacy goes to die and everyone pretends it's community. My mother was always immaculate on the outside. Hair perfectly curled, lipstick flawless, clothes ironed to military precision. But behind closed doors, she was a master manipulator, sweet and charming in public, venomous at home. She had only two settings: syrupy affection or boiling fury. Danielle, 5 years older than me, never had to worry about which version she'd get. She was the golden child, varsity volleyball, charismatic, loud enough to fill a room. Mom adored her, and Danielle adored being adored. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the girl who liked computers, did chores without being asked, avoided conflict, and didn't take up much space. I thought being helpful would earn me love. Instead, it made me invisible. After high school, I broke the family pattern. I earned a full scholarship, graduated early, and landed a good remote IT job by 22. While my peers partied and burned money, I saved, invested, planned. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because growing up in chaos made me crave stability more than anything. At 24, I bought a modest 3-bedroom home in a decent neighborhood. Nothing special, just safe, quiet, mine. The plan was to rent it out. Then Mom called one night, sobbing about rent increases and how she and Danielle might have to move in with my aunt, though she despised her sister. "It's only temporary," she promised, "just until we get back on our feet." I should have said no. Every memory of her belittling me, every time she compared me to Danielle, every dismissal of my success should have warned me. But she was my mother, Danielle was my sister, and a small, pathetic part of me hoped this might finally be the moment they appreciated me. So I said yes. No rent, just help with utilities and groceries. That was the deal. The first month wasn't terrible, but small sacrifices piled up quickly. I moved my desk out of the office because Mom wanted a sewing room she never used. Danielle took the 3rd bedroom but spent most of her time on the couch, FaceTiming her on-again, off-again boyfriend. Groceries disappeared. Dishes sat for days. Amazon packages arrived. Expensive coffee makers, protein powder, random gadgets I didn't order. Every time I asked about expenses, Mom snapped, "Are you keeping score now? That's ugly, Barbara." I swallowed every insult. I bought noise-canceling headphones and told myself it was temporary. I even tried making weekly family dinners. Each one ended with Danielle complaining about the food or Mom reminiscing about how hers was better 20 years ago. Then came the moment. Something inside me shifted. I came home from the grocery store and discovered my $12,900 standing desk, the one I assembled piece by piece, had vanished from my room. When I asked where it went, Mom answered casually, "We moved it to the garage. Danielle needed space for her home gym." Danielle popped into the hallway to add, "It's temporary, Barbara. You can work in the kitchen." They had turned my desk into a squat rack. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt something hardening inside me. For the next 2 weeks, I stopped cooking for them, stopped restocking the fridge, worked from the coffee table just to make a point. They complained that I was being difficult. Then came the final straw. It was a Tuesday night. I had survived a 12-hour workday dealing with a server meltdown. Exhausted, hungry, ready to microwave the meals I'd prepped for the entire week, I walked into the kitchen and found every single one of my containers dumped in the sink. Empty, smeared, not even rinsed. My name, written in bold black marker, stared up from the plastic like a joke. "Are you serious?" I asked. Mom barely looked up from her phone. "What? You ate all my food? Again?" "Well, you didn't say we couldn't," she said flatly. "It had my name on it. I made enough for my meals this week." She slammed her hand on the table. "Why are you being so selfish? You think just because you make a little money now, you're better than us?" "I never said—" "You didn't have to," she snapped. "You walk around here like we're freeloaders." "You live here rent-free," I said quietly. Not confrontational, not cruel, just stating a fact. Her eyes blazed. "So now you're holding that over our heads? If you hate it so much, leave." "I own the house, Mom." She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Then maybe you should start acting like a real woman instead of hiding behind that precious computer. You're a burden, Barbara. You always have been. Your father didn't leave because of me. He left because of you." My keys slipped from my hand and hit the tile with a metallic echo. That sound felt like a trigger being pulled. In that moment, something inside me stopped trying to survive and simply shut off. I packed silently. Clothes, laptop, chargers, toothbrush. I left everything else. When I walked past them on my way out, they didn't look at me. Not even a flinch. Just the glow of the television painting their faces while I disappeared from their lives. For a month, I stayed at a friend's place, then found a sublet. I worked, slept, tried to breathe. Then, one afternoon, that text came from Danielle. "Why didn't you cover the mortgage this month?" I stared at the message, and for the first time in years, I smiled. "Oh, I thought you didn't need me." And that text was the moment their world began to crumble. The moment I sent that text, "Oh, I thought you didn't need me," my phone began vibrating nonstop. Danielle called 5 times within a minute, then 10, then 12. When I didn't answer, she switched to voicemail. The tone of those first messages was exactly what I expected. Arrogant, impatient, dripping with the entitlement she'd been raised on. "Barbara, answer your phone. You cannot just walk out and stop paying for this house. Grow up." Then my mother chimed in with her favorite blend of guilt and superiority. "This is what happens when you let money turn you cold. I didn't raise you to be this selfish." But as the night went on, their certainty cracked. The tone shifted. By message 11, panic seeped in. Danielle's voice shook as she demanded to know if I had canceled the mortgage autopay because it bounced. Mom's voice trembled as she whispered urgently, "We got a letter from the bank. It says we're in default. What does that mean? Are they going to foreclose? Barbara, call me back." I lay in my tiny sublet, listening to their messages while folding laundry. No emotion, no fear, just a clear, calm detachment that felt foreign after a lifetime of being their designated sponge for guilt and responsibility. Because here's the truth they never understood. The house was mine. Not partially mine, not technically mine, legally, fully, entirely mine. I bought it outright. There was no mortgage, not for me. The mortgage they thought they were paying, that was a credit-building loan I took out after they moved in because Mom begged me to help Danielle repair her credit score. I added Danielle as an authorized user so the payments would reflect positively on her history. I never told them it wasn't a real mortgage because I knew they'd weaponize that information. I paid the loan myself every month. And here's the part that still makes me shake my head. That $1,200 in rent they believed they were saving. I had placed that same amount into a separate savings account every single month since they moved in. A quiet emergency vault I maintained because some part of me always suspected this moment might come. But the betrayal didn't begin when I walked out. It started long before, in subtle, suffocating ways I ignored because I wanted so desperately to be seen. Danielle mocking my promotions. Mom rolling her eyes when I mentioned investments. The time Mom hosted a dinner for her friends and introduced Danielle as my pride and joy while I stood in the kitchen carving the roast I had cooked. The time she forgot my birthday entirely, yet spent 2 months planning Danielle's, complete with a $400 custom cake charged to the joint house account I paid. And then, 2 weeks before everything collapsed, Danielle confronted me while I was on a late-night call with a coworker. She barged in without hesitation, completely ignoring my headset. "Barbara, quick question. Can I put the BMW in your name?" I remember pausing the call slowly and just staring at her. "What?" She said she wanted to refinance, but her credit was too damaged, and if I put it under my name, she'd get a better rate. When I told her no, she scoffed like I was being dramatic. "Relax, Barbara. You've got good credit. It's not a big deal." She even threw in that I still owed her for utilities she'd been avoiding for months. For the first time, I saw it clearly. She didn't see me as her sister. She saw me as a resource. That same night, I walked into the bathroom and found my toothbrush floating in the toilet like some twisted joke. I never asked who did it. Danielle or her boyfriend, someone who had no respect for boundaries. I grabbed my keys and left. They assumed I'd cool off and return. They always expected that, but I didn't come back. While they spiraled, I felt strangely serene. Their messages turned to emails, then texts, then social media DMs when I didn't respond. And finally, a letter. I found it waiting in my sublet mailbox, a white envelope with my name written in deep red ink, as dramatic as a soap opera prop. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother, the first one I'd received from her since childhood. It began with guilt, claiming she didn't understand why I was doing this to them. Then manipulation. "Your sister isn't perfect, but she looks up to you. You're hurting her." Then anger. "This is your home. You don't get to walk away and take everything with you. You're acting cruel, heartless. This isn't the daughter I raised." I folded the letter and placed it into a drawer without feeling anything. But the real shock came 2 days later. A notification from my bank popped up. $1,300 withdrawn from my business savings account. That account was completely separate from household finances. It shouldn't have been touched by anyone but me. My heart slammed in my chest as I checked the transaction. The withdrawal had been made in person with my debit card. Only one other person had ever held that card, my mother. Years ago, she helped me open the account, and I foolishly listed her as a trusted contact. I never removed her access. She had taken the exact amount of the past due mortgage payment she believed I owed. I went cold, not angry, just hollow. She didn't even hesitate. She simply acted as if the money belonged to her, as if I belonged to her. I drove straight to the bank, filed a fraud report, canceled every card, changed every password, and sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the entitlement behind it, the certainty that I would eventually cave because I always had. That night, I made a decision. Not to forgive, not to fight, not to argue, but to take control. I didn't want revenge, not the loud, fiery kind. I wanted precision. I wanted boundaries, and I wanted freedom from the belief that I needed their approval. The first week after the theft felt like white noise. I moved through my days in a fog, working, sleeping, responding to emails, like someone living underwater. I didn't tell anyone, not even Ethan, the man I'd been cautiously seeing for months. I didn't trust myself to open up. But life has a strange way of pushing you toward the people who matter. One afternoon, Ethan sent me a picture of a dog he saw wearing a tiny hoodie, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed out loud. We met for coffee that evening. I told him the general outline. My family moved in, took advantage, I left, things got ugly. He didn't interrupt, he didn't try to fix it, he just listened. And then he said something I still think about. "That house isn't your home anymore, Barbara, it's your scar." I didn't understand immediately, but he explained, "Scars don't take you back to the pain. They remind you that you survived it." That sentence became the turning point. That night, I went home and started taking my life back. I removed Mom from every shared utility account, closed the joint card, froze the old business account, and opened a new one under a new LLC, changed every login, every password, filed the fraud claim properly. Within a week, the bank refunded the stolen money. It wasn't about the cash. It was about feeling in control for the first time in years. And that was only the beginning. Once the bank refunded the stolen money, something inside me settled in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. It wasn't peace exactly, more like clarity. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was reacting to my family. I was choosing my next move. I started sleeping better. My appetite returned. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night, expecting to see a missed call from my mother or a string of angry texts from my sister. I didn't need to check my phone constantly anymore. I didn't owe them that. The changes bled into my work too. I threw myself into a new project idea that had been floating in my mind for months, a redesign for a client security dashboard. I pitched it to my manager during a casual Thursday meeting, expecting him to ask me to table it. Instead, he lit up. "This is excellent, Barbara. Send it to me by Monday. I'll get you a small team." Within 3 weeks, I was leading that team. By the end of the second month, my manager pulled me aside after a meeting and said, "We're promoting you, senior engineer. You earned it." His tone wasn't condescending or pitying. It was genuine recognition, something I had never received from the people who were supposed to love me first. That promotion marked a shift, a reminder that I was capable, competent, valuable, none of which my family had ever admitted, and that confidence bled into the choices I made outside of work. I bought another property. It wasn't glamorous, just a fixer-upper duplex on the outskirts of town, the kind with ugly wallpaper, creaky floors, and a smell you couldn't quite place. But it had potential, it had bones, and it was mine. I didn't tell Ethan at first. I didn't tell anyone. I just quietly signed the papers, hired contractors, and spent my weekends tearing up carpet, patching holes, and repainting cabinets while listening to audiobooks. With every nail I hammered, every strip of old flooring I pulled up, I felt part of myself returning. Fixing the duplex felt like fixing the parts of me I thought were permanently damaged. That peace lasted until the phone call. I didn't recognize the number at first. It rang twice, went to voicemail, then rang again within minutes. I finally answered on the third try, expecting a contractor or delivery delay. Instead, Danielle's strained voice came through. "Barbara, we need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I just waited. She hesitated, then added, "I know you're pissed, but Mom's not doing great. She's been stressed." The bank called again. I felt nothing. No guilt, no longing to comfort her. Then she continued, stumbling over her words. "We've been trying to keep up with the bills, but it's just a lot." "You mean my bills?" I asked, steady and calm. A long silence followed, then a weak, "Okay, yes, but it's your house, right? We thought you were still handling that." There it was, the confession under the fear. They still believed I existed to hold their lives together. They still thought I'd come back to clean up the mess they made. It was almost sad how predictable they were. "You also thought I was a burden," I said quietly. Another silence, this one deeper. "Yeah, that was messed up," she muttered. So quietly I almost didn't catch it. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Not anymore. I wasn't interested in an apology squeezed out by desperation. "So what now?" Danielle asked, her voice trembling. I knew exactly what now. "Now," I said, "you learn what it feels like to be responsible." "Barbara, come on!" I hung up. That wasn't anger, that was strategy. Because for the first time since I left, I realized something crucial. They still believed this whole situation was temporary. They thought they were waiting out a tantrum. They thought that once I calmed down, I'd fall back into place. The provider, the fixer, the emotional safety net. But I was done being their net. I was done being anything they expected. And that clarity led to the next phase of my life. Not survival, not recovery, but rebuilding. I began with myself. I went on daily walks, cooked real meals instead of the grab, whatever, and work approach I lived on before, and allowed myself small luxuries without guilt. A new jacket, good coffee, a bouquet of flowers for my kitchen table. Things that made my space feel like mine. Then I did something I never expected. I opened up to Ethan. We'd been dating slowly, almost cautiously, both of us giving space for the other to breathe. He never pressured me. He never pried. He always waited for permission. So one night, sitting on the freshly painted floor of the duplex, eating takeout, I told him everything. Tidied up, but honest. The move-in, the manipulation, the stolen money, the unraveling. He listened without interruption. After I finished, he rested his hand on mine and said, "You didn't deserve any of that, and you're not going to repeat it." There was something grounding about that. Someone saying I wasn't doomed to live in cycles. Someone believing in a version of me that wasn't shaped by my family's cruelty. But even with Ethan's support, there were loose ends I needed to tie up. The house, my real house, was still legally mine, still occupied by my mother and Danielle, who were now squatting without paying a single bill. And that's when I shifted from emotional detachment to calculated planning. I began researching, not in a frantic, desperate way, but with precision. Late at night, I studied landlord-tenant laws in my state, reading legal forums, case studies, government regulations. I learned something important. You can evict family members. It's messy, it's slower, but it's legal. And since they had no lease, since I was the owner, since they had refused all financial responsibilities, they were considered tenants at will, which meant I could start the process. But I also knew my family well enough to predict their behavior. If I served them a simple notice, they would sabotage the house out of spite. They would break things. They would claim harassment. They would play the victim. So I needed something stronger, something they couldn't manipulate, something official, which is how I came up with the idea that would change everything. A voluntary health and safety inspection. Not because the house was falling apart, but because they had made sure plenty of things were. Danielle's unventilated home gym in the garage, Mom's endless wall plug-ins overloading electrical outlets, the kitchen they barely cleaned, mold I'd spotted months earlier behind the bathroom tiles. If the inspector documented hazards, I would have the legal backing to require immediate vacancy for repairs. All I had to do was open the door and let him see. And so for the first time in months, I went back to that house, not to visit, not to reconcile, but to prepare for the next step. The step where I stopped being the quiet daughter in the background and became the woman they never saw coming. When I decided to initiate the inspection, I wasn't driven by anger. I wasn't even driven by revenge. What pushed me forward was something quieter and more powerful, the realization that I no longer owed them my silence. I no longer had to shrink myself so they could feel big. For once, I could make a decision purely for my own protection, and the law could back me up. Scheduling the voluntary health and safety inspection was easier than I expected. I called the local housing department, gave the address, and requested an evaluation to ensure the residents met safety requirements. There was no need to exaggerate. The truth was messy enough. The inspector arrived 2 days later on a bright, deceptively peaceful morning. I stood on the porch with a neutral expression and let him inside. I didn't guide him. I didn't point anything out. I simply watched. He stepped into the living room and immediately paused. "Strong odor," he murmured professionally as he scribbled. The trash bags in the hallway were overflowing. The carpet had stains I didn't recognize. Moving toward the garage, he stopped again. "Who installed this equipment?" he asked. Danielle's home gym, random metal bars, mismatched weights stacked dangerously high, resistance bands clipped to exposed nails, looked like a lawsuit waiting to happen. "My sister," I answered. I asked her to keep it minimal, but she expanded. He nodded, clicking his pen. "This is an electrical hazard, no ventilation, no clearance space." He photographed everything. In the bathroom, he peeled back a loose tile and frowned at the mold blooming beneath it. "This hasn't been serviced in years." In the utility closet, he pointed to the HVAC system. "Very overdue for maintenance." I just shrugged. I asked them to handle it while I was traveling for work, but it looks like they forgot. He gave me a look that was half sympathy, half disbelief. By the time he finished the inspection, he had documented several minor but legally significant violations, not enough to condemn the house, but more than enough to justify requiring that all occupants vacate so repairs could be completed. When I received the official report 2 days later, I stared at the pages for a long time. Not triumphantly, just with a sense of finality. This was my leverage. This was the line between their chaos and my freedom. The next step was serving the notice to vacate. I printed it on high-quality paper, not out of pettiness, but because I wanted no one to question its legitimacy. 30 days. 30 days to leave the house they had turned into a pigsty. I waited until I knew they were out. Danielle's car was gone, Mom's too, and slipped the folded notice through the mail slot without ringing the bell. No confrontation, no drama, just a silent piece of paper that would change everything. The following morning, my phone erupted. Danielle's messages arrived first in rapid-fire bursts. "Are you kicking us out?" "What the hell is wrong with you? You can't do this." Then my mother's. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" "I raised you better than this. You're abandoning your family." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The document spoke clearly. But eviction wasn't enough for me. Not because I wanted to torment them, but because I knew my mother. I knew Danielle. They would rewrite the story later. They would paint themselves as victims and claim I had exaggerated everything. So I created a record no one could dispute. I hired a professional photographer to take detailed images of every corner of the house, the rotting dish pile, the stains in the carpet, the overloaded outlets, the broken lamp, the dusty HVAC filter that should have been replaced 2 years ago. He moved efficiently, capturing it all with crisp resolution. These photos weren't for revenge. They were for truth. After that, all I could do was wait. Those 30 days were some of the strangest of my life. I went to work, renovated the duplex, cooked meals with Ethan, enjoyed my first real sense of independence, and every few days I drove by the house, not to confront them, just to observe. A quiet loop around the block, enough to know they were still there, still pretending nothing was happening. I noticed patterns, lights on at 3 a.m., as if someone was pacing, panicking. The garage door cracked open with loud music blaring from Danielle's gym. New cars appearing in the driveway. Friends, boyfriends, people who had always seen my home as a free hangout. Once, I even saw Danielle stumble outside with a beer bottle in her hand, yelling into her phone. She didn't see me. I parked a block away, took a photo for documentation, and left. Meanwhile, I kept working on myself. My manager praised my leadership. My promotion became official. Ethan and I grew closer, slowly, gently, the way I needed. One evening, after showing him the progress on the duplex, he looked around the freshly painted kitchen and smiled. "You're building something real here," he said. "Your own life, your own space." I joked that I was reclaiming the kingdom, but the truth was simpler. I was reclaiming myself. Still, I knew the calm wouldn't last. People like my mother don't go quietly. People like Danielle don't leave without theatrics. I expected the shouting, the crying, the accusations, but none of that came. Instead, on day 30, less than 24 hours before the deadline, I received a short voicemail from my mother. Her voice was quiet, strained. "Barbara, please call me back." I didn't. I had nothing left to say. Instead, I prepared for the final step. I scheduled a police standby for the next day, not because I expected violence, but because I wasn't going to risk any accusations. I booked a locksmith for the same morning. Then I gathered every document, the inspection report, the vacate notice, the photos, and placed them neatly in a folder. On day 31, I arrived at the house with the locksmith and the officer. The sky was overcast, the kind of heavy gray that feels like a warning. But the driveway was empty, the blinds closed, the house was silent. I knocked once, no answer. The officer knocked again, nothing. "Your call," he said calmly. I nodded. The locksmith opened the door in minutes. The house was empty, not cleaned, not repaired, just abandoned. Pizza boxes on the dining table, trash bags in the hallway, a broken lamp, a chair missing a leg. The air smelled stale, thick with sweat, beer, and neglect. But there was no note, no apology, no explanation, only absence. I stood in the living room long after the officer left, letting the silence settle around me. It wasn't joy I felt, not vindication. What washed over me was something heavier, deeper, closure. Not because they understood what they'd done, but because they no longer had access to me. For the first time in my entire life, the house was finally quiet, and it was mine again. But the eviction was just the beginning. I still had to decide what came next, and I already knew forgiveness wasn't part of my plan, but consequences were. The day I regained possession of the house, standing in the middle of those filthy floors and the stale, stagnant air, I realized something important. Getting them out was only the first step. What came next wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about hurting them the way they hurt me. It was about accountability, the thing my mother and Danielle had spent their entire lives avoiding. And for the first time, I was in a position where they couldn't twist the truth, gaslight the situation, or shove the blame back onto me. I started with the evidence. The photographer's pictures were already organized by room, kitchen, living room, hallways, bathrooms, garage. Each image, grease-streaked appliances, trash piles, damaged walls, mold, overloaded outlets, told a story more honest than anything my family had ever said to my face. I printed several copies, labeled them by date, and attached the inspection report that documented the safety hazards. Then I gathered every invoice from the contractor I hired to repair the damage: drywall patching, mold remediation, electrical rewiring, carpet replacement, debris removal. But the biggest category wasn't physical damage, it was financial misuse. The stolen $300, the utilities they promised to pay but didn't, the endless Amazon orders they placed on the household account, the food they consumed as if I were their personal supplier, the credit lines Danielle opened using my address, and of course, the fraudulent withdrawal my mother made using access she was never supposed to have. I organized it all into a digital folder titled Teresa and Danielle, Final Record. When the folder reached over 70 files, I knew I had what I needed. Next, I called an attorney, Philip, the same no-nonsense lawyer who handled the duplex purchase. He wasn't cheap, but he was efficient, which mattered more. When he answered, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I want to pursue damages for property destruction and theft, I said, and I have receipts. There was a brief pause on the line, not doubt, but surprise. Then he said, email me everything. I sent the folder. 2 days later, he called back with a tone I hadn't heard from him before. We have a solid case, Barbara. Those words settled over me like armor. With Philip handling the paperwork, I moved on to the next step, the part of the process Danielle never anticipated. She had used my address for a gym membership, a credit card application, and, unbelievably, even a payday loan. Once I had proof they no longer lived at the property, thanks to the eviction notice, police standby documentation, and the inspector's affidavit, I contacted the credit reporting agencies. I disputed every account tied to my name or address. One by one, the fraudulent connections were removed. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, they were reassigned to Danielle. That was how Danielle discovered I had reported her, through the sudden collapse of her credit score. The meltdown came swiftly. She showed up outside of my duplex one evening, screeching, pounding on the door like a banshee, screaming that I had ruined her life. I didn't answer the door. I didn't open the blinds. I simply called the police, filed a report, and later obtained a restraining order. That wasn't revenge. That was protection. A week later, I received a text from an unknown number. You really think this makes you better than us? I blocked it. I didn't need to know whether it was my mother or Danielle. The entitlement was familiar. Then came the court date. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I felt prepared. The courthouse was small, the kind of place with beige walls, flickering lights, and chairs that made everyone shift uncomfortably. Philip arrived in his usual crisp suit, carrying a thin binder, the case he had organized down to the decimal. When my mother and Danielle walked in, I recognized the outfit Mom was wearing, a blouse I bought her for her birthday years ago, a birthday she barely acknowledged afterward. Danielle looked frazzled, her hair tied messily, her polo wrinkled, her expression equal parts wounded and irritated. They didn't look at me, not once. When our case was called, Philip presented the timeline with cold precision. The judge was a quiet woman with sharp eyes who said very little but observed everything. Philip laid out the photos of the damage, the inspection findings, the repair invoices, the stolen money records, the credit misuse, the unpaid utilities. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The facts were enough. When it was Danielle and my mother's turn to speak, they did exactly what I expected. They flailed. My mother insisted I had given her permission to use my debit card. Danielle claimed I had never said she couldn't open credit lines using my address. At one point, Danielle even blurted out, "She never said we couldn't drink her beer." The judge raised an eyebrow so slowly it was almost impressive. The judge cut to the point. "Ms. Urban provided extensive documentation of theft and damages. Your explanations are inconsistent and unsupported." Mom looked down. Danielle clenched her jaw. We won. The judge ordered them to pay restitution for the property damage, the stolen $1,300, and the unpaid utilities, plus court fees. It wasn't life-ruining money. It wasn't meant to be. It was a statement, the first time in their lives where their actions had consequences. But the real fallout began after the judgment. I posted the eviction photos, anonymized, on a landlord forum. It wasn't to shame them personally. It was to warn others about the risks of renting to family without a lease. The thread went viral. Property owners shared their own horror stories. One user messaged me privately saying, "This sounds exactly like my cousin." I simply replied, "Be careful who you let stay rent-free." When the restitution arrived, I used every cent to improve the house. Not just patching holes, renovating it fully. New siding, fresh paint, refinished floors, a new front door, a new mailbox with a new nameplate. I breathed life back into the house brick by brick. Once everything was complete, I listed it for rent at a premium rate. The new tenants, a couple in their 50s, quiet and polite, were the kind of people who cleaned before moving in, who fixed the small things themselves, who greeted me with a casserole on the first day. Seeing them settle into what used to be my childhood battleground was surreal. The house wasn't my burden anymore. It wasn't my scar. It was income, stability, a symbol of growth. Meanwhile, Danielle's credit collapsed so hard that a mutual acquaintance messaged me one day. "Heard your sister tried to buy a car and got denied. Something about collections?" I replied simply, "I think she has some unresolved issues." As for my mother, last I heard, she was staying with a cousin in Iowa, the same cousin she used to mock mercilessly. Life has a way of rearranging pride. And me? I kept building. The duplex became a triplex. Then I bought a small commercial space, a cafe that needed a new leaseholder. I didn't open the business myself. I rented it to someone who did. Ethan and I grew closer. He didn't push. He didn't interrogate my past. He just held my hand through the pieces of it and said, "You deserve a life that doesn't feel like punishment." And for the first time, I believed him. I hadn't destroyed my family. I hadn't even sought vengeance. I had simply stopped allowing them access to me. I had forced them to own their actions. I had chosen myself. But the story wasn't over. I still had one more chapter, the final rise. The day everything truly shifted wasn't the day I evicted them, or the day the judge sided with me, or even the day I rented the house to new tenants who treated it with the respect it had deserved all along. The real shift happened on a quiet morning, months later, when I walked past that same house, freshly painted, newly landscaped, almost unrecognizable compared to the wreck my mother and sister left behind, and realized I felt nothing. No bitterness, no anger, not even satisfaction, just distance. The kind of distance that comes from outgrowing a version of yourself so completely that the memories feel like someone else's life. My new tenants waved at me from the porch, smiling the way people smile when they're genuinely content. The rent check was already deposited in my account, but it wasn't the money that warmed me. It was the simple fact that the house was functioning, healthy, peaceful, stable, exactly the opposite of what it had been for most of my life. It had stopped being my battlefield and had become my asset, a quiet victory. Meanwhile, the fallout for my mother and Danielle didn't stop at restitution. Word traveled quickly through our old community. Not because I spread it, God knows I stayed silent except with lawyers, but because gossip is a sport in that town. People noticed when my mother suddenly showed up living with the cousin she'd spent years criticizing. They noticed when Danielle's credit collapsed. They noticed when neither of them had a stable address for months, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty hearing any of it. I didn't feel triumphant either. It wasn't joy, it was release. For so long, I believed that enduring their treatment made me loyal, forgiving, a good daughter, a good sister. But all it did was teach them that I had no boundaries. When I stopped giving, when I walked away, their world collapsed because it had never been built to stand on its own. That wasn't my fault. It wasn't my burden. It never should have been. As the house stabilized, my own life expanded. The duplex I renovated turned out beautifully. New floors, fresh paint, updated electrical. I filled both units within weeks of posting the listing. The rental income became a cushion, a safety net I had built myself, instead of being drained by a family that kept me in survival mode. I didn't stop there. With my promotion at work and my newfound confidence, I made moves I never would have dared before. I bought a rundown commercial space downtown, a tiny cafe with peeling paint and faded awnings. I didn't plan to run a business. I just saw potential where others saw decay. I leased it to a baker who had lost her original storefront during the pandemic. She cried when she signed the contract, and it reminded me sharply of the kind of women I wanted to surround myself with: resilient, hardworking, grateful, fighting for themselves. It was everything my family refused to be. My relationship with Ethan grew in a way that felt almost unnatural at first. Steady, supportive, uncomplicated. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to reveal some hidden cruelty or selfishness. Trauma makes you suspicious of kindness. But Ethan never faltered. He showed up to help paint the duplex. He brought dinner when I worked late. When I had a moment of panic, thinking I was repeating old patterns, he didn't take offense. He just said softly, "You've spent so long being used that you don't recognize partnership yet, but you will." He didn't rush me. He didn't push for intimacy or declarations or timelines. He let me heal at my pace. We built something gradually, deliberately, brick by emotional brick, until one evening, while we sat on the floor of my nearly finished triplex eating cheap takeout, I realized I wasn't waiting for chaos anymore. I wasn't waking up afraid. I wasn't checking my phone expecting a crisis. I wasn't bracing myself for someone else's disappointment. For the first time, I felt safe. And one night, months into our relationship, Ethan asked me something simple. "If you hadn't been forced to grow up the way you did, what do you think your life would look like now?" I thought about it. A younger version of me would have answered painfully, "Better." But the woman I had become understood something different. "I think," I said slowly, "that maybe I wouldn't have built all of this. Maybe I wouldn't have learned how strong I actually am." He smiled. "I think you were always strong. You just finally had space to be." That stayed with me. My mother and Danielle faded out of my daily life. No more calls, no more messages, no more attempts to guilt or manipulate their way back in. Maybe the court case humbled them. Maybe the eviction scared them. Or maybe they finally understood that the version of me they controlled no longer existed. Last I heard, my mother was still in Iowa, telling people she doesn't keep in touch much with her younger daughter anymore, as if distance were her choice and not the only consequence she'd ever earned. Danielle bounced between short-term rentals and boyfriends, blaming everyone except herself as usual. I didn't check on them. I didn't block them either. I simply allowed the silence to stretch between us like a wall, built out of every time they mistreated me. They became part of my past. I became part of my own future. Months after the court case, I walked by my freshly renovated house one more time. The tenants were planting new flowers in the garden. The shutters were clean, the door bright, the mailbox shining with its new nameplate. The house looked happy. It looked alive. And for the first time, I truly felt it. This chapter was over. I wasn't the burden. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the quiet girl they used to drain dry. I was the foundation, the one who built everything, the one who rebuilt herself after they stripped her down. Family had nearly destroyed me, but letting go of them allowed me to become more than they ever imagined. And as I walked away from the house, sunlight warming my shoulders, I understood something profound. My life didn't begin when I ran from them. It began the moment I realized I never needed their approval to be whole.